Hello and welcome to the EisnerAmper Engaging Alternatives podcast series. I'm your host, Elana Margulies-Snyderman, and with me today is Ryan Coughlin, founder of Danu Venture Group, a venture capital firm that invests in next-generational digital and physical infrastructure for national security. Today, Ryan will share his outlook for investing in this space, including the greatest opportunities, challenges, and more. Before we dive into the conversation with Ryan, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to EisnerAmper wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also find us on YouTube at EisnerAmper. Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Ryan, to kick off the conversation, tell us a little about yourself, your firm, and how you got to where you are today.
So Danu Venture Group invests in both physical and digital infrastructure solutions, often with national security implications. I started my career as a turnaround guy working for some of the larger private equity firms in the world, and also for Alvarez & Marsal in their private equity services group. We took a lot of hands-on operational roles at companies, which we think applies greatly to what we do today. It's helped us see around corners of how future operational challenges can manifest when growth occurs, and understanding everything from how data hygiene impacts KPI and metrics-based management, all the way down to how a term sheet can impact future conflicts with investors. So I think it gives us a good purview on how to be better investors. I then worked as an advisor and a consultant and an operator at a number of satellite companies, which had a lot of business with governments and our own intelligence and defense community, and started to see the role that infrastructure could play in both geopolitical stability and influence around the world.
At EisnerAmper, we are creative problem solvers that take a 360-degree approach focusing on you. We're an award-winning firm with decades of experience. EisnerAmper, let's get you ready.
Ryan, give your focus on VC investing in digital and physical infrastructure and national security. I would love to hear your high-level outlook for the space.
I think we're in a golden era of infrastructure innovation. And we kind of break it down into two categories, digital and physical. Digital being what powers compute and autonomy, data centers, semiconductors, hardware innovation, and then the supporting technologies of that infrastructure. So energy transmission, and cost reduction for those things. And then where that touches the physical world in kind of autonomy and sensors and data collection and aggregation. And so there's been a ton of public and private investment in those spaces, ranging from the IRA to Stargate initiatives to TSMC building $100 billion of chip fabs in the United States. And then over the last decade, private investment in infrastructure has more than quadrupled in the last 10 years. So we see a lot of momentum on both the public and private side. And a lot of these groups are trying to build projects and be asset owners. And we find ourselves in an interesting spot, supplying innovation, speed, cost, security, and other advantages to those large infrastructure projects.
And Ryan, more specifically, what are some of the greatest opportunities you see in your space and why?
Well, we kind of see it on a spectrum or a flywheel. On one end, we have this compute infrastructure and what enables that to be built. And that includes energy production and transmission and the hardware that I mentioned for data centers. And then on the other end is where the technology touches the physical world. So autonomy and data and sensor collection. And then we've also looked at in the middle, there are groups that aggregate and simplify that data communication between those two worlds, and who also are value-added distributors of either the compute or the autonomy solutions.
Ryan, on the other hand, what are some of the greatest challenges you face in your space and why?
I think typically, although this is changing, it's longer timelines. Infrastructure investing is not known to be quick. There are regulatory hurdles. There are large CapEx requirements, which would be the second challenge. I think we're solving the first one by looking at companies that don't have long R&D timelines remaining. So they're a little bit later stage in their technology development. And then on the CapEx requirement side, we are trying to find companies that those large infrastructure funds or public funds are deploying this type of technology. And so we look for non-dilutive sources of growth like project finance and others for some of our companies. And then the third would be, it's just complex. Like I mentioned, you have to understand regulatory trends, and you have to understand that this world is starting to blend between, cloud and grid. And we rely on a deep bench of industry experts and scientists and engineers to help us understand the technical challenges. And then we have a lot of relationships with both in and around DC in our own operational backgrounds that help us navigate that complexity.
Ryan, we've covered a lot of ground today and wanted to see if there are any final thoughts you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting time to be in the space. I think a lot of the last 10, 20 years, we've seen amazing efficiencies delivered in the kind of online world. If you think about the way that you shopped 20 years ago versus today, I think we're starting to see how that efficiency is starting to bleed into the physical world. And everything we do, from how we interact to public transport, to how we interact with AI, and how we interact with our physical world, will begin to change. And I think that we're at this period where the next 10 years will define how we live for the next 100 plus.
Ryan, I want to thank you so much for sharing your perspective with our listeners.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to the EisnerAmper podcast series. Visit EisnerAmper.com for more information on this and a host of other topics. And join us for our next EisnerAmper podcast when we get down to business.